Constitution in relation to the format of the estimates has something to say. And again, Article 222A says that in relation to the entities which are supposed to be independent, the constitutional entities, that the annual subvention should be reflected in the estimates by way of an annual subvention approved by the National Assembly after review, blah, blah, blah. We had also discussed, Mr. Speaker, drawn to the attention of the President and his advisors, that several... So that is true. The Ombudsman's Office, there are issues in relation to the Public Procurement Committee. Incidentally, the PPP is the only party not to have submitted a list of nominees for this particular body. And so that is another dimension that had been raised, and I think we need to get answers, maybe at the Committee of Supply, so that some decision could be taken on this side as to how to deal with the government's request. I will also draw to your attention, Mr. Speaker, as you will be aware, that this House passed and a bill, it passed a resolution pertaining to the extra budgetary agencies. And it specifically called upon the Minister in relation to those very contentious agencies which seem to be used as a device for bypassing this House, entities collecting state revenues and using state revenues in a manner that is less than transparent, in a manner that seek deliberately to deny this House its role of overseeing and reviewing the expenditure requests of the country and looking at the priorities. So NISIL, GGMC, the Lotto Fund, the use of the funds from the 2005 floods, the Cricket World Cup, the hosting of Carifesta 10, and the ICC 2020 tournament. All of these items were the subject of a resolution by this House. And without going through the details of the resolution, let me just remind colleagues, Mr. Speaker, that in relation to those agencies, the decision was that the entities which, as of February of 2012, I emphasize this because we have since had a mad rush to, on the other side, to lay annual reports and a whole set of things. But the resolution was clear. It says, if these entities, which were supposed to have laid reports before this House, audited accounts, and other reports, if by February of 2012 those reports had not been laid, those entities should be required, and the minister responsible, in this case, Mr. Minister of Finance, should have been required to channel all the funds other than the operating expenses that they had to the consolidated fund until such time as we would have looked at it and decided otherwise. Mr. Speaker, nothing appears to have happened whatsoever on that front. And yet we have a request for an appropriation bill, for approval of an appropriation bill. Again, having defied the House, the minister comes back to the House to demand that monies be provided for additional expenditures which in fact amount to more of the same. In other words, we are part of the revenues of the state are diverted and managed without reference to the House. The problem, therefore, is the same. same as with the constitutional offices. And there is a fourth element that I need to mention, Mr. Speaker, that the bills which have been passed, at least two of them I understand, are with the President for signature. The time available by which that signature should be effected, or a report concerning the President's reason for not signing, that time, I believe, has expired. And, Mr. Speaker, in such circumstances, again, I have a difficulty understanding how we could be expected to pass a budget when such fundamental breaches of the Constitution and of our own responsibilities have continued to take place. So that's a general background, Mr. Speaker. That's the general background. In his speech, the Minister of Finance made reference to 7 prerequisites, such as commitment to democracy, equal access, and so forth, which prerequisites were highlighted in the 2012 budget. Political dialogue, which is supposed to be part of those that package, has or would have provided the opportunity for the minister, and I'm sure that he's not surprised, not to be arriving at a position in the Committee of Supply where preconditions, prerequisites, concerns about legality and constitutional acceptability would loom large. Those discussions could have removed this block, or remove the need for us to try and deal with that at the last minute. And here we are, they've yet to be attended. Public pledges to political dialogue by the government fill the areas, even as officials charged with such dialogue on the government side once again refuse either to provide information or to fix meetings in the context of a series of meetings rather than a last-minute meeting before the consideration of the estimates. The question of equal access, which was also one of the things mentioned by the Minister, is an interesting one. Again, although it is much touted, it is clear that the government honors these things more in the breach than anything else. And the current outrage over allocation for TV and radio frequencies is a case in point, demonstrating the extent to which the government is contemptuous of public opinion and its constitutional obligations. Although the Parliament approved the establishment of a body to oversee the exercise, which should have been part of that allocation of frequencies, we find ourselves in a situation where the effect of a decision taken after the House passed the bill, but before it was assented to, leaves us in a situation where equal access is certainly what did not take place. So that is a concern. But what I was saying earlier, Mr. Speaker, is that the bills passed by the House seem to lie unsigned because these political and constitutional issues that I have mentioned, these political and constitutional issues are regarded by the government in a very peculiar light. And I say peculiar because this is a government that oftentimes claims to have been the catalyst for a return to democracy in Guyana. And we find ourselves in a situation where the president believes that he has no obligation to assign to bills which his party doesn't approve, which his party can't approve on their own because they are in a house in which they are in a minority. And for as long as they're a minority, they're supposed to consult with that minority and to seek the support of the minority rights, demand the rights of a majority, although they hold a minority in the House. So we have a number of things. There's also the case of the Minister of Finance and the minister who claims to have been advised by the Attorney General, and I have no doubt to believe that he wasn't, in which decisions taken by this House concerning expenditures, including those under the contingencies, out of the contingencies fund, that did not meet the criteria set out in the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act, were approved, and funds not approved under the Appropriation Act were spent. We would like to know how the government proposes to resolve that conundrum, because it is an important issue, again, in terms of whether it is the House that has the responsibility for approving expenditure, or the Minister of Finance by himself, or Minister of Finance and the Attorney General. In the light of these matters, Mr. Speaker, what I would call sins of omission as well as sins of commission, you would have thought that the Honourable Minister of Finance would recognize the prudence of being perhaps a little circumspect in his presentation. I was particularly caught by the overture in the budget. I think on the second page, well, certainly within the first 5 minutes of his presentation, an overture that I think was provocative, if not arrogant. It was a tirade against the opposition parties for a variety of perceived sins facilitated by the constitutional, what he calls, one-seat majority, via which the House passed motions, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, or bills that defy reason and collide with the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, up to now, after over a year of debate, neither the Attorney General or the Minister have explained why the constitutional offices are not all reflected like the ERC in the estimates, and they have the gall to speak of proposals that conflict with the Constitution. There is no more obvious conflict with the Constitution than the estimates before us today that defy Article 222A. And then there was reference, Mr. Speaker, to the undesirable legislative actions. Oh, well, these, sorry, no, they're not your words. I'm wanting to say that these undesirable legislative actions to which the minister referred, the ones that defy reason and collide with the Constitution, include the attempts by the House to correct the abuses as reflected in the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act. Presumably that is one of the things that collides with reason. The interesting thing is that the minister himself laid an order here after the first motion that removed the audit department from the schedule, and subsequently nothing has happened in relation to that office as regards the Constitution. So, Mr. Speaker, these political descendants of Dr. Jagan, who speak in hushed terms about his struggle for independence and the rights of the majority, somehow see no contradiction between Dr. Jagan's professed principles and behavior, which accepts a majority. In this case, they're accepting a majority decision only if that majority comprises PPP members. Only if the majority comprises PPP members. The President's party, having lost at the polls, lost its majority at the polls, goes to the courts, in effect, to authorize them to continue to be as though the PPP had won a majority of seats. That's the point. That's the point. You don't have a majority and won the power to behave as a majority. So that's the point. In case you missed it. Okay? So the president's party, that is not a majority, madam. Look at that is a plurality. You have to look at the dictionary. Instead of shouting, read the dictionary. You have a computer, go online. Under the current dispensation, Mr. Speaker, the President only signs bills, it seems, presented by his party. And that is the new democracy that the PPP has heralded in for us. It is loser-take-all politics. That's what I call loser-take-all politics. You lose a majority and you exercise the functions of a majority. Many of those who stood alongside the PPP when the PPP was fighting itself for democracy would have never expected this behavior. Even under the PPP, it was expected that a simple majority would be recognized with no distinction between the majority of 50 and a majority of 1. The basis for the Parliamentary Corporation, Mr. Speaker, the basis for Parliament has to be a resolution to these issues pertaining to the budget itself. Mr. Speaker, as regards the measures themselves, I look at the estimates suggests a number of interesting facts. We see, for example, what appear to be the movement in numbers, that is from one year to the next, and from budgeted figures to revised figures, that suggest that in some places, especially as regards GDP, you see the manipulation of the numbers in order to attain growth rates. Well, thank you very much, Honorable Minister. If you look at the figures for agriculture over the last 4 years, you will see what I'm talking about. In fact, if you look at the balance of payments figures, especially the movement of non-factor services, you will see what I'm talking about. So that's one dimension, Mr. Speaker. And when one looks at loans and the borrowing by the government, the movement from one year to the next also poses a problem in the sense that the figures posted in the budget at the time of the budget seem to vary so much from the outturn at the end of the year. I would suggest either that sometimes, as the World Bank was arguing, planning is very poor. Because if within the year, it's March now, for example, the year comes to an end, the budget preparation comes to an end in December. Sorry, the revision is effective at the end of December.
Equaling 1 hour. And that, if it's on the very first day we are breaking the agreement, then I don't know what we're doing in this budget. Thank you.
What I have here, 1 second, please.
But Mr. Speaker, please allow me. That is not the agreement we had. What? That is not the agreement we had. Here we spoke with the Owen and I said it for an extension. If she was going to say, well, yes, but it's going to be 15, because we had an agreement that if he needed an extension beyond the hour, he would get it.
May I be heard, please? The last thing we need to do is to address this matter in such a public fashion. The document I have before me says 30
is significant. May I just remind you, Mr. Speaker, since this is an issue that has exceeded the total volume of debt contracted by its two predecessors, the PNC as well as Dr. Jagan's government. So it's not something that's insignificant. There's a large amount of external indebtedness here, and it needs to be noted that in view of the time, I'm going to perhaps be a little eclectic in dealing with other issues. Let me say that one of the areas that needed attention, and we would have liked to see a more detail, more care on it, has to do with the treatment of youth. Under the government of Dr. Jagan, as well as the PNC government of Mr. Burnham, the country was faced with, I mentioned that because it's not a new problem, it's a perennial problem, but they had initiatives, both of them, to try and deal with the problem of the large and growing youth unemployment. And in the case of Dr. Jagan, you had, of course, the MMA. That was a major effort made to tackle. And subsequently, of course, there was the question of the Youth Corps National Service, MMA, for example, on the PNC side, to deal with the question of unemployment. We have no similar initiative of any import or of any worth in relation to the current budget before us. At a time when the unemployment problem is proposal, the president seemed responsive. At the time, it seemed that we could go forward if we could discuss the modalities. Nothing has happened. It seems to have died a death. Elsewhere, countries faced by unemployment amongst youth of the same magnitude, they are putting in place major measures, including measures for helping young people to get apprenticeship in numbers. The point is that when these proposals that the minister mentions are looked at, they are insignificant relative to the numbers affected. If I might jump to the question of old age pensions, Mr. Speaker, the old age pension arrangements, I think, are something of concern to us. After discussing this again with the government last year, and the government having indicated in the first instance that an interim payment will take it to 10,000, we are appalled to find that a year later, the government cannot even see it fit to move to 15,000 at a time when revenue levels have increased substantially and significantly, when the monies collected by VAT, from the VAT, for example, are significant over the preceding year. And yet, with resources available to them, the minister boasting about the size of the budget, you have this mean-spirited response to a major need, a major group, a group that is challenged. We have, at the same time, if you look, Mr. Speaker, we were speaking in relation to VAT and the expenditure of monies on basic items. The movement of prices for food and for medicines over the year 2012 as a whole have gone up by 10 percentage points. This is more than the 5% paid to across the board to public sector workers. So the issue here, Mr. Speaker, is a very important one. We are saying that a variety of concerns have been raised. A number of issues mentioned by the minister have not dealt adequately with the needs of the poor. And I know the minister is going to cite what he's proposing in relation to NIS and water, not NIS, water and electricity. The point is in relation to those areas that not all pensioners will benefit from them because of the way that the arrangements have been set out. So that is going to be the problem there. As regards my final set of points, Mr. Speaker, Gaisuko and GPL, again emerging as a major factor here. I was at pains, Mr. Speaker, to point out the importance of institutional reform, the importance of organizational change, depoliticization of our major corporations. This again was the subject of discussion with the government. I'm emphasizing this, Mr. Speaker, because making suggestions to the government is almost like throwing water on a duck's back. They ignore them. You have numbers in the estimates that suggest that output levels will move positively and significantly from one place, from 1 year to the next. And the point I was making earlier that seemed to have upset our colleagues on the other side is this. To the extent that you only show the numbers increasing, but the factors that are supposed to enhance the output are not there. In other words, the investment levels don't seem to be going in that direction. Okay? The reform of the corporations is non-existent. Okay? Depoliticization is non-existent, which means no change is going to be effected. And when the minister comes to us and tells us that Gaisuko will only require $1 billion in transfer this year, we don't believe him, Mr. Speaker. We don't believe him because the minister has already established a reputation for being in love specifically with the contingencies fund. So no sooner will we pass these votes than he will come back. You're not in love? He is enamored, Mr. Speaker. He is enamored with the contingencies fund. And the attorneys general, auditors general, over the last 6 years at least, have drawn our attention to what I would regard as serial abuse of these contingencies. Up to 2010, the estimates, the 2010 Auditor General's report attest to that. Attest to that. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, that is a matter that the Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, in response to our demands for reform that will justify the monies and give us the assurance that they wouldn't be asking for more money, he gave us I don't know what to call it, a plan of some type. And here we are, a year later, they are asking for 11.2 billion beyond the amounts approved last year, which was 6 billion. We have here, Mr. Speaker, a black hole. Okay? The combined sugar and GPL are a black hole in which resources of taxpayers are being dumped. And this is taking place at the expense, yes, it's a black hole because there is, the only point in putting money there is if you're going to fix it. And since you've made no attempt to fix it, in relation to Gaisuko, Mr. Speaker, we are promised a plan. We promised a plan. Okay? Mr. Speaker, let me conclude. I never mentioned you didn't show much interest in them in looking at the NIS because up to now there's been no proposal. The President promised that the government views on the NIS would be laid in this House by September of 2012. We haven't seen them. And instead of fixing a board that has given away a lot of investment income, we just see a transfer of 125 million to the NIS. That can't fix the NIS. Mr. Speaker, what I want to conclude is to say that the financial position of the government has been quite favorable compared to previous years. That is the case now, that's my reading of the minister. In spite of this, Mr. Speaker, the opportunity to fix management and political problems has been missed due to a political obsession about the no dialogue. The measures demonstrate continued political denial and ignoring of public concerns in areas such as corruption, which in fact are getting worse, and nepotism in the store is again getting worse. I'm not going to call any names, but you know who I'm talking about. I believe, yes. So, Mr. Speaker, the program allocates resources primarily to the privileged few. And if you look at the allocation of the capital expenditure, you will see a dramatic reduction in the quantity of resources made available to agriculture. No logic. But yet you have agriculture doing better this year. I don't know what you noticed, but I notice you're not shouting now. So, agriculture, we've got Transport and Harvest Department cut drastically at a time when they have major vessels that seem to have point is, the budget has been framed in relatively easy financial circumstances, but the measures, especially the relief provided to the poor and vulnerable, are far less than the figures suggest we could afford, especially when compared to the sweeteners provided by the government to their friends and cronies. There's a certain meanness of spirit underlying the proposals, which the Minister of Finance has tried to hide by various tricks and sleights of hand. What in the fairground in England is called smoke and mirrors. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
It is not my intention to be dragged along an aimless road of negativity. It is not my intention to be dragged in a debate that seeks to castigate Guyana and does not analyze the plan that what I call sleight of hand. The argument that fact brings a burden to the poor and the consumers without acknowledging the fact that that 15% replaced a 30% consumption tax is sleight of hand. That is sleight of hand. Not what the Minister of Finance produced here. The honorable member denigrated us. He said that we missed the lecture on public finance. Well, my dear Professor Carl Barrington Greenwich, the Honorable, one champion of the poor, the man who knew exactly what to do to improve the conditions of the poor. In 1990, had this to say. In the Honorable Carl Barrington Greenwich's own words. Budget speech 19 foundations for the government, and this is what the Honorable Carl Barrington Greenwich said. The government was of course especially concerned about the rise in the price of certain essential goods. The retail price of rice, for example, rose by 224% in the first 2 months after devaluation. And that of cooking gas rose by 244%.
About political will.
Barrington Greenwich. Mr. Speaker, as I said, it is not my intention to go down and recap the state of Guyana, the state of hopelessness. But over the last 7 years, this government has transformed the economic landscape of our country. This government has created an environment that encourages both domestic and foreign investment. And Mr. Speaker, every single one of the statements I make here, I will substantiate with facts a little later. Secondly, improve the quality of the country's social and physical infrastructure. Improve access to shelter through the provision of housing to low-income families. Expanding the economic base of the country so that it's more resilient to external shocks. Improve the competitiveness of the domestic economy. Improve the country's human capital. Strengthen the national institution responsible for safety and justice. Reduce poverty and inequality. Maintain fiscal prudence. And most importantly, restore reported in the ECLAC 2012 Economic Survey of Latin America and the Caribbean. Mr. Speaker, let us look at GDP per capita. The average income, which would give us the average income and improvement in the well-being of our citizens. The GDP per capita increased from US $1,694 in 2006 to $3,148 in 2012. Isn't this progress? And isn't this advancement in our economy? But Mr. Speaker, one can argue that increase in per capita GDP can have inflationary effect. But this has not been the case here in Guyana. And why it has not been the case? Because of the same measures that the Honorable Carl Greenwich characterized. It is a subsidy on key and important commodity and services that this government took on behalf of the people that would have ensured inflation rate remains stable. You may call it black hole measure, but it is these we had inflation decreasing to almost 3.5. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member raised the question of investment. Let us look at foreign direct investment and what is the evidence in relation to this. The growth in foreign direct investment between 2006 to 2012 trended upward to $1,326,000,000. Our foreign direct investment in 2006 was $102.4 million. Our total US dollars, our foreign direct investment in 2012 accumulatedly stands at $1,326,000,000. Mr. Speaker, this is as a direct confidence investors have in Guyana, the confidence they have in our economy, and the confidence they have in this PDP civic government leading our prosperous Guyana. Guyana's economy is projected to grow by 5.6% during 2013. The story continues. I have a booklet that I will publish on all that is said and being said about Guyana, even as we speak here now.
Propaganda.
Mr. Speaker, as a result of our economic success, we are no longer classified as a highly indebted country. And let us speak about the issue of debt sustainability. Listen to this. As a result of our economic success, we are no longer classified as a highly indebted country, but now reclassified. As a low-income, middle-income developing country. In international publication, we are no longer characterized by a shortage of critical consumer and intermediate goods such as fuel, food, and machinery. Foreign exchange necessary to acquire these goods. Instead, we are a nation on the move, with an economy that is posting high growth rates, creating great opportunities. We are witnessing return migration for the first time in history. Mr. Speaker, this is what we call, and this is the dream we will work after. Every single night. Mr. Speaker, it is in this house to strip ourselves of selfish desire. Let us do that. accepted standard is 8%. Viability. The local financial institutions remain viable and financially sound. And why is this? It is because of the policies, the institutional strengthening and reforms that the Minister of Finance led, organizing the financial sector of this country. Mr. Speaker, having said this, it is not surprising, and I want us to listen to this, it is not surprising that our banking system is ranked 30 out of 142 countries in terms of soundness. We are ranked 30 out of 142 countries in terms of our soundness. And who ranked us? It is not the Minister, but the World Economic Forum 2011.
What about corruption? Tell me about the corruption index.
Mr. Speaker, in other words, our financial reforms are responsible for greater access to credit and at low cost by the local private sector. Not only access. Why do I say this? GDP was 24.15% during 2012 of the lending and advance to businesses, compared to 14.12% in 2009. The average lending rate, I'm not going down that old, when the average lending rate was 42%. The average lending rate in December 2009, 2006, 0.12%. The average lending rate today is 10.1%. So not only is the access to capital abundant, but more importantly, the cost of capital has also reduced. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member raised a question in terms of the cost and ease of doing business, which I'm most willingly ready to answer. The Minister of Finance recognizes that everything is not perfect. He recognizes that in living the guy needs to improve ourselves. And that is why he outlined and made it very clear that there's 50 to 60 measures that we are going to put in place to improve our ranking on the doing business indicator. We are setting ourselves the target that within 5 years, once we accomplish the implementation of these 60 measures, we are going to move our ranking from its present position to 80, in line with the Caribbean and Latin America. Mr. Speaker, Guyana's steady GDP growth rate of 5%. Let me just edify the honorable member Carbonex. The action plan will be enacted over 2 to 5 years and consists of more than 60 competitiveness and efficiency enhancing reforms, which will be implemented in coordinated manner across 10 target policy areas, namely starting a business, dealing with construction permit and license, getting electricity, registering property, getting credit, protecting investment, paying taxes, trading across borders, and enforcing contracts and resolving insolvency. Those are the broad areas in which we have targeted measures that will see our ranking improve dramatically in the next 5 years and doing business indicator. Mr. Speaker, now they asked us first, why you ain't doing this? When we say we're doing it, they ask you why you didn't do it 5 years ago. Mr. Speaker, SIMA programs that target and poor approach to growth and creation of wealth. What he did not say by his usual sleight of hand approach was that budget 2013 provides $27.7 billion. 13.3% of the budget would go towards programs like that SIMA would have implemented. Mr. Speaker, let us now turn our attention to structural production transformation. The Marriott Hotel, for instance, would yield a positive net present value of estimated $6.5 million over a 10-year holding period. This is equivalent to a rate of return of 11%. The total value creation or value added impact of the project is estimated to be approximately $17.4 billion during the construction phase alone. If you look at the airport expansion, based on the economic feasibility study, the airport expansion project is estimated to yield an internal rate of return of 11%. The CGIA has experienced continuous growth in passenger traffic over the last 10 years. The official statistics shows that passenger arrival increased from 99,370 passengers in 2001 to 156,910 during 2011. A growth of approximately 58%. During 2012, passenger traffic increased further by 16%, significantly higher than what we experienced worldwide, 5%, and in Latin America and the Caribbean.